Hello and welcome to episode 2 of the podcast Breaking, Building, and Belonging, a Better Together Story and Guide. Last time we went through the preface of the book, and this time we're going to be talking a little bit about what this book is about, how it's meant to serve you. And so the way that I did this is as an introduction and a guide through the dungeons and doorways of reality. And so the book has various sections and chapters, and every chapter that's within a section will start with a quote. And so this one starts with, "When you lock the truth of who you are created to be away, it shrinks to the size of a kernel, a morsel that is ever present, calling from its captivity for you to be who you were always meant to be." And that's actually a quote from me, and it is something that's found in this chapter, and it'll become apparent fairly soon. And so if we think about that last episode, the preface explains the why behind the book, and this is more of an introduction and guide to who the book is for and how you might choose to use it. So before I deliver the standard about this book outline, I'd like to provide a story to illustrate better where this comes from and who the book is written for. I write this for you after more than 5.5 decades of seeking to free the kernel of truth, or kernel o' truth, from the prison of a once perceived hopeless reality. In the action-packed screenplay of my life, there once was a strong, caring colonel who was captured many decades ago by Sergeant Stunad. I can't recall when Colonel O'Truth was initially caught behind enemy lines. My loose reckoning is that his apprehension occurred sometime in my early childhood, a time when I knew the unbridled joy of being loved and cared for, a time for playing in the woods near my house, a time when Sergeant Stunad had not yet begun broadcasting. In those heady days, all was right with the world. I didn't compare myself to others. I could do anything. I could be anything. I felt that love, and the love that I received from family, was pure, unadulterated, and unconditional. I didn't know abandonment or hurt. I didn't know envy for what others had materially or otherwise. And the good colonel was so loud and clear in those days. He continuously whispered all the affirmations a young person ought to hear in my ear, ideally all the days of their life. One day, who knows what day or what year that was, the broadcasts started. They were intermittent at first. Soon, they were relentless, drowning out much of the unbridled joy and freedom I felt in those early elementary school years. Year after year, the broadcasts of the Good Colonel began to be replaced by those of the slimy, scathing Sergeant Stunad, and he told me no one loved me. I heard him whisper, "You are of little or no value to the world." With each whisper, my protector, Colonel O'Truth, was brought to lower and lower levels of the dungeon that was my soul. There he remained for many years. He was tied up where the light had difficulty getting in. Before I knew it, I was a teenager, and Sergeant Stunad became the dominant voice in my life. He filled my head with things like, "You'll never get married. You'll never have friends. You'll never have a girlfriend, let alone a wife. You'll never get a good education or job. You'll always be poor. You're ugly. You don't deserve to be loved or respected. You should give up any creative or artistic feelings that stir in you to write or teach or speak or lead. You, happy, at peace, content. You're kidding yourself, son." At some point, I went to war with Sergeant Stunad. It was a bit of a cold war. It was a war of umbrage and one-upmanship. I started to prove Sergeant Stunad wrong. or so I thought. I fought for and won many things Sarge said I would never get. I took the hills of work. I traversed the valleys and summits of romantic love. I formed a small platoon of progeny. I even scaled the battlements of a modest austerity. However, I never did get handsome, but I got rid of my warts and I outgrew some of my preteen gangliness. The ransom I paid to set the colonel free was to shut down my Sherman tank-sized ego. I had to realize I could not fight this battle alone. I found friends. They had a map that led to connections. Those connections led to others, who soon started to light the path to freeing the colonel. Along the way, Stunad got quieter and quieter. The whispers became barely audible as I made my treacherous trek toward the colonel. The price I paid was letting people in beyond the close circle I held tight. Even later, I started believing in something greater than myself. One day, after a momentous struggle with the sergeant, I found him. Truth. The colonel was set free. In many ways, the old me died saving Colonel of Truth from that dungeon. Finally, I was brought back to a whole different life. I locked away my guns and stopped warring with the sergeant. Today, when I hear his hushed pejoratives seeping in, I turn up the volume on another broadcast. I hang out with the colonel now. He's my guide. I learned that Colonel O'Truth, or the Colonel of Truth for me, is always pointing me to my purpose. The colonel often tells me I have something to share and shouldn't hide that. When I let his broadcasts in, he encourages me to let others see what I have stored inside me. He says some people need to hear what I have to say. Most need me to listen, and a few need me to show up for them. That said, this story and book are not about me. They're about you and him, whoever your colonel is. It's not about asking you to find precisely the same truth I have. I'm happy to share more if you like, but that's not the sole purpose of this book. This book is about whoever the colonel is locked away in your dungeon. Your Colonel O'Truth is the key to the Colonel of Truth. If you picked up this book, or you're listening to this book on a podcast, it's a truth you likely have spent too much time denying and locking out as I did. The Colonel of Truth holds the key to who you are. I refer to it as a kernel, not because it's only part of the truth, or it's small. It's the whole truth about you. I call it a kernel only because you've made it so small. When you lock the truth of who you are created to be away, just like the quote up above when we started, when you lock the truth of who you are created to be away, it shrinks to the size of a kernel, a morsel that is ever present, calling from its captivity for you to be who you were always meant to be. The Colonel of Truth was probably well known to that kid you used to be when you believed anything was possible, before sergeants do not and the traps of comparison, shame, and ego got in your way. Your colonel was more like a bountiful bushel of truth when you were young, no matter your age. You can return to that state when you read this book and learn how to build on your reality. And once you find and free him, your Colonel O'Truth will help you realize your purpose and potential. When you accept that and learn strategies for listening to and acting upon that guide's advice, the Colonel will grow toward its intended size and become your Colonel. C-O-L-O-N-E-L. Colonel. It's not easy. We avoid letting the Colonel have his say. That is where bias comes in. We all have a strong tendency toward confirmation bias. That's when you migrate toward information that confirms what you, quote unquote, already know. The trouble is, much of the time, what we already think we know about ourselves is wrong. Most of it is derived from Sergeant Stunad's version of the truth. The sergeant's propaganda gets overwhelming, and a snowball of lies forms, pushing the good colonel deeper and deeper down into the dungeon until we can't find him anymore. We get lost behind enemy lines with no map, few connections, and no ability to free him or ourselves. And so this book is offered to help you free your Colonel O'Truth. It provides clues and a map to free them. It's meant to serve as a navigational aid through the dungeons and doorways of your experience. It's a blueprint for building on your reality. So in this book, it's broken up, like I said, into a bunch of different kinds of chapters that each make up a section. And so the types of chapters, I'm going to go through those, but each of them sort of make up a coherent section that you go through. And so in this book, character portraits are used as anchor points. They're provided to give you a glimpse into the characters we all have running through our life stories. My characters are likely different from yours on the surface. Still, I hope the portraits I introduce reveal something about your reality. Perhaps they'll remind you of someone or something along the way. You know, memory's a trickster. I've tried to portray people and events as I recall them, as necessary. The portraits are occasionally amalgams of more than one person, and I've changed some names, relationships, and minor details to further the narrative in some stories. While the thoughts are primarily my own, I have used many anecdotes and lessons from my real life and virtual mentors. If I miss calling that out anywhere, please charge that to my head, not my heart. Similarly, I'm thankful to the real life and virtual editors who helped me build this blueprint for you to follow. I believe each character, whether spot on, accurate, or hopelessly embellished, was placed as a marker to guide me through the dungeons and doors of my reality. Hopefully, I played some small role in their story as well. My characters and I have made it this far together, and I can't wait to see where we go next. Likewise, your characters have been placed there for you. They help color and contextualize your reality and guide you in making decisions that move you forward. Another recurring feature of this book is the reflections on reality. These chapters are intended to help guide you around some key curated takeaways from the previous character portrait. They are my best attempt to share the crux of the lessons I've learned. These discoveries did not happen in real time. I've continuously reflected as I grow and sought live, virtual, and spiritual thought leaders to help me through things. You shouldn't expect to understand all your lessons at that moment either. Time and emotional distance from events of reality, especially those featuring strong characters or circumstances, are great allies in this challenge called life. The what I could have done differently sections are a window into my after-action review of my actions. They are my attempt at finding humility and grace. They've been critical in moving forward with purpose. I'm sharing those with you to temper each reflection, because although I've benefited from wise in real life and virtual mentors and guides through over 5.5 decades of life and 4 decades of leadership lessons, I encourage you to see my reflections or theirs as only one way to process reality, not the only way. My decisions and perspective are imperfect, as are theirs, and I probably could say yours. So I have another quote. Leaning into the reality that there are no perfect solutions and navigating the messiness of the imperfect decisions we make more and more wisely over time is an essential learning I hope you leave with. And that brings me to the next part of the section, the next chapter. It's called Reflections on Reality. Those are thought leadership sections that are designed to give you 1 or 2 simple things to do quickly to gain traction and reflect on your current reality. I offer 1 or 2 simple things. Any new reality, purpose, and insightful perspective must be built. We must do this one paving stone at a time. We must lay down a new path and start from right where we are now. I know I've never been able to jump to a whole new outlook and pivot so wholly from anything that I was an entirely different person in a new situation overnight. I hope you can give yourself the permission and grace to try things and fail. The Go Deeper stories are optional supplements to each section. They're meant to be more symbolic or instructive and less biographical. Think of them as another way to explore each topic. In our busy lives, we often want to get to the practical lesson right away and have control over how we spend our time. Rather than taking that control away by editing the stories for you, I have allowed you to move through the subject matter at your own pace and preferred depth. So what I'm saying is, if you prefer, skip these bonus stories, come back to them later. You can always use these Go Deeper tales, which are drawn primarily from my blogs, videos, media, and podcasts on YouTube and other social channels at 4for-Soaring, FOUR, the number 4, SOARING, or at 4for-Soaring spelled out, to reflect on how you can build on reality better. I also encourage any reader to check those other channels out, as we all learn differently and retain more when exposed to multiple input modes. So are you ready to build on reality? This episode is at an end, but let's get started. Why don't you jump into the next episode with me? We're going to jump into one of those character portraits, and I think you'll need to forgive me as I have to take you to a dark place or two before I turn on the light. Thank you for listening. I will catch you on the next episode.